Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I'm William Bell, and my co-host is with us today, Don Preston. How are you, Don?
I'm doing well, William.
Good.
Very, very well. Enjoying the absolutely gorgeous weather we're having in Ardmore.
I was just about to ask, are you still having that 80-plus degree weather out there?
Well, it's not quite that, but it was like up to 55 or 60 degrees here today. The sun was out. Boy, just gorgeous.
Yeah, we had the same here in Memphis. It's a really, really beautiful day. And when you get 55 degrees, that's like summertime, you know?
It is.
During this time of the year. So I'm really, really grateful for it when we have these nice days that are not overcast and not a lot of freezing rain going on. Of course, we had some snow, little snow flurries yesterday, a little bit of snow, but nothing stuck or anything. And so that's how it's going up and down, I guess. So just trying to stay flu safe in this kind of weather is a big deal. And
one day it's freezing, the next day it's 60. I mean, your body doesn't even know how to react to it. So anyway,
over time we'll get there.
That's right.
Well, we have pretty interesting subject matter to cover tonight, and
yes,
I noticed that we had a little bit of interest in the topic. You shared something with me. When was that? Yesterday? Was that yesterday or the day before?
I believe yesterday.
Yeah, because it was just done. So this is very recent, and we're going to be talking about and addressing the subject from Dr. Kenneth Gentry, who is a postmillennialist, and he wrote a topic on his blog, which is postmillennialismtoday.com, and the question was, are preterists really futurists? And I thought, what an interesting question. I'm sure Don thought the same thing. Don passed this on to me. And I read it, and I just sat there just thinking, wow, this is a really interesting article. And the twist in the article is that he wants to say, and I know we're going to get into this. I don't want to take up a lot of time because I know Don's ready to go, everybody. Oh, and by the way, let me get this chat room open because I know you're probably out there, so I apologize if you are listening and you were planning to get in the chat. I forgot to launch it, but I am doing so now, and so it should be open momentarily. All right, the chat room is open, so if you are planning to be in, then we invite you to come on in. I apologize for that. Sometimes I get a little distracted or carried away or just too busy to think about it on the front end, and I have to end up doing it later, and I know that sometimes affects your ability to get in. But anyway, back to what I was saying. One of the things that he states in his article, in his blog post, is that we have been using the term futurist as a pejorative term. Now, I thought that was rather interesting, all the while he's calling us hyper-preterists. But at the same time, wanting to claim that preterist actually carries the idea of futurist. That's a rather interesting concept to me. But at any rate, I'm trying to hold Don down, ladies and gentlemen. I'm teasing him a bit by making these comments at the beginning because, I mean, he's like ready to go. At any rate, the article title, "Are Preterists Really Futurists?" is deceiving. I mean, why not just ask the question, are partial preterists really futurists? Because that's what he means. But he uses the term preterist as though futurists have a claim to that term, and the people who say that we're preterists, which we are, as though we don't. So they have to make up a term for us to deny us the right and the ability to use the term that more accurately and aptly applies to us. And I just find that rather interesting. At any rate, we're going to introduce Dr. Don K. Preston to you today and have him to introduce the commentary on this subject. I'm sure we'll go back and forth along the way as we go along. But so, Don, I know you've got some interesting things to say about this. And Kenneth Gentry has been dodging you in debate for almost, for how many years? And yeah, there's one other point that I'm going to touch on, and Don can bring this out a little bit later. But, we have a good friend of ours with the initials SF, who a few years ago tried to make the argument stick, or the claim stick, that, preterism was dying on the vine. And now we have the illustrious Kenneth Gentry, who comes back and gives us full postmillennial documentation that it has become a thorn in somebody's flesh. So at any rate, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to open the line, at least close my end of the mic for the moment, and allow Don to talk about it. I know, he's probably going to cover all of these and a lot more. But at any rate, Don, so why don't you kind of introduce your viewpoint of this and give us some direction on where we're going today.
Well, William, I really, really appreciate all of those introductory remarks that you made there, because they're spot on. The article, pardon me, is really quite disingenuous, and it's misleading on many different levels. Let me go back to something you briefly mentioned there, however, to give our listeners a little bit of additional information. You made the point that Dr. Gentry has been dodging me for several years in regard to a formal public debate. He has been challenged not only by me, but I really haven't kept count, but I know it's well in excess of 10 separate, independent challenges from different people on my behalf, challenging him, inviting him to debate me in a formal public debate. Over the last few years, his excuse and reason has been that he's trying to finish a massive book on the book of Revelation. Now, I must tell you that in visiting with him in 2012 at Criswell College in Dallas, Texas, where he and Craig Blumberg and Dr. Greg Beale and another couple of men were on the dais. All of us were there speaking on the millennium. And I got to talking to Dr. Gentry. And I asked him how close he was to getting that commentary finished. Now, it was originally going to be a single commentary. It had expanded into 2 volumes at the time. That was in 2012. And he said, I don't know if I'm ever going to get it finished. I just keep finding more and more information and documentation. I said, well, I understand that. I really look forward to it. But I can tell you this, that Dr. Gentry has now come up with some really, really non-creedal positions on Revelation 21 and 22, in addition to a host of other non-creedal positions that he takes. And I want to get to the irony of that here momentarily. But in his relatively new book entitled Navigating the Book of Revelation, Dr. Gentry shares with us that Revelation 21 and 22, in spite of initial appearances and in spite of the historical view, we might add, he says Revelation 21 and 22 is not about the consummate new heaven and new earth. It is talking about the new creation that arrived in AD 70. Now, folks, if that doesn't rattle your cage, and if that does not inform you as to how non-creedal, non-historical Kenneth Gentry is, then you really don't know much about eschatology in the historic church. So I just wanted to point that out. Well, back to the debate issue. He has been challenged numerous times to meet me in formal debate. He's always said, no, he can't do it. On one occasion, he wrote an article on why he would not debate me or debate the issue of full preterism. And one of the reasons he gave there is because it's non-creedal. Well, again, we'll get to that more in just a moment. But because it's non-creedal, non-historic, and because it's heretical, then he has refused to debate it. Well, today, I sent an email, especially in light of Dr. Gentry's article, which was published, as William took note, on his website, postmillennialismtoday.com. But since he published this article on the 8th, which was yesterday, I thought, well, he's taken a shot at preterists, true preterists. So, once again, I believe it's time for Dr. Gentry, instead of just simply sitting at his keyboard and taking shots at true preterists, he ought to be willing to stand up and to debate the issue. So, just today, I sent him another personal email inviting him to come to Ardmore, Oklahoma, in 2017, Lord willing, for our Preterist Pilgrim Weekend of 2017, in which our theme will be the failures, the shortcomings, the biblical deficiencies. I don't have a working title yet, but the concept and the theme is the shortcomings of postmillennialism. And to meet me in a formal 2-day public debate. Now, I haven't heard back from him as of the time of the program, but folks, let me urge you, if you would like to see a debate between Dr. Gentry and myself, contact Dr. Gentry and urge him to accept my challenge. I am absolutely positive that such a debate would be of incredible interest both to the postmillennial as well as the true preterist camp. Because after all, in many circles, Dr. Gentry is viewed as the number one apologist for the postmillennial view. So if Dr. Gentry will just simply step up instead of continuing to take shots from his keyboard, but if he'll step up and engage me in public debate, I know that we will have a tremendous amount of interest in that exchange. So again, if you would like to see a debate between Kenneth Gentry and myself, please contact Kenneth Gentry by email and urge him to accept my challenge. And by the way, when you do that, send me an email, blind copy me to let me know that you have contacted him, urging him to do that. Let's let Dr. Gentry know that there is a lot of interest in seeing a formal debate between himself and myself on the issue of the resurrection of the dead, whether or not 1 Corinthians 15 has been fulfilled. The resurrection to overcome the Adamic death has been fulfilled and realized, and that the victory over that death is now ours. We're not waiting for it. It's now ours. So, that's the intro to where we're at tonight. I mentioned the fact that Dr. Gentry has written in the past that he will not debate a true preterist because preterism, true preterism, what he calls hyper-preterism. And I think William's point was so spot on. He says that preterists use the term futurist as a pejorative term. Well, in the first place, I don't think we use it as a pejorative term. We simply use it as a descriptive term. It is because someone that believes in a yet future coming of the Lord, yet future judgment, yet future resurrection of human corpses out of the ground, guess what? They're a futurist. It's just a simple fact.
That's right, and thank you for bringing that out, because that was definitely one of the points that I was going to make. When we use the term futurist, we're just using it for what it absolutely says and what it means. And yet, because of the fact that apparently they realize that they can't be both preterists and futurists at the same time and be consistent, they want to claim that we are using it in a pejorative sense. But we're not. We're using it in the same way they use it.
Look, I remember reading the term before I ever became a preterist. And before I ever came to accept Covenant Eschatology, I remember reading the term futurist as used by futurists.
Yeah, and Gentry acknowledges that in his blog post.
Yeah, I mean, so if futurists have consistently used the term futurist to describe themselves, then how and why, especially how, can Gentry logically, sensibly charge preterist as using the term futurist in a pejorative manner? No, we're using it in exactly the same way the, quote, futurists, unquote, themselves use it. So it's a little bit, well, it's a whole lot unfair. And it's disingenuous for Dr. Gentry to say, oh, those hyper-preterists. And as William so eloquently brought out a while ago, is Gentry not using the term hyper-preterist in a pejorative manner? He doesn't read true preterists referring to ourselves as hyper-preterists. I don't see that term being used by true preterists. Certainly not in a normal, everyday, acceptable designation. So here is Dr. Gentry saying, look at those preterists. Look at those hyper-preterists. They're using the term futurist in a pejorative manner. Well, Dr. Gentry, how are you using the term hyper-preterist?
Now think about that.
We certainly don't use that term.
Yeah, think about this for a moment. They created the term hyper-preterist to talk about us, while at the same time they acknowledge that futurist was a term they have always used about themselves.
That was the very next point I was going to make.
Oh, okay.
Excellent point. They invented the term hyper-preterist, just like they invented panteist, and some other terms probably. But the point of fact is, as William so well stated, folks, they've used the term futurist for themselves all along. No pejorative meaning attached. Okay? Then they come along and invent the term hyper-preterist to stick it on us, even though true preterists do not use the term, and by the way, don't like the term. So, who is being guilty of using pejorative terms here? It's not the true preterist. It is someone by the name of Kenneth Gentry. And I don't think it's fair. I think it's a whole lot of being disingenuous to accuse preterists of using pejorative terms when in fact we're not the ones guilty of doing that by any stretch of the imagination. Now, there's certainly some terms that we could perhaps invent were we in the business of using pejorative terms, and yes, there are some true preterists out there who use some language that I wish they wouldn't. They use verbiage that I wish they wouldn't. But guess what? That's a two-way street. I mean, all you got to do is read Facebook and on the board amillennialism, from which I was recently booted, when I posted a challenge to any amillennialist, any qualified amillennialist, to meet me in formal public debate in 2016, that is this year, at the Preterist Pilgrim Weekend. By the way, not a single person stepped up to the plate and accepted that challenge. Okay? You should have seen some of the names that true preterists were called. I mean, they were far and away not nice, genteel, decorous, honorable epitaphs at all. And yet, here again, here is Gentry using a pejorative term against true preterists. I think both camps, really. I think the futurist camp, no negative connotation intended, and the true preterist camp, there needs to be a lowering of the heat. People who find themselves tempted to use pejorative terms, to use abusive, vituperative terminology, needs to step back from their keyboard, take a deep breath, and to realize this is about the issue of eschatology. It's not about personalities. It's not about integrity. It is about the issues. So, folks, when you get on the internet, stop using abusive language. I don't care if you're a futurist or a preterist. How about it? Stop using abusive language. Conduct yourself as a Christian gentleman or a Christian lady and discuss issues, not personalities. Stop impugning people's integrity. Stop questioning their integrity or their standing before God, and discuss the validity of the issues that confront both camps. That would go a long, long way toward the proper discussion of controversial issues. Well, back to something else. William, I know that you I know that you caught this in the third paragraph down. He says, Preterism holds that there are a number of passages in the New Testament that refer to the destruction of Jerusalem, even though many Christians have viewed these as referring to the time of the Second Advent. So, Kenneth Gentry says preterists hold to the time statements, although many Christians deny those time statements. But of course, Kenneth Gentry is a partial preterist. And he believes that those Christians who reject those time statements are wrong. So catch that, folks. And he continues, preterists derive this, that is their understanding of the imminence of some text, they derive this understanding from the express statements of Scripture, statements declaring that the events will occur in, quote, this generation, unquote, because, quote, the time is near, unquote, soon, and so forth. Hyperpreterism, though, uses these passages as a leaping off point, building its innovative theology on these passages and applying temporal limitations where they do not appear. Now, folks, if you want to see inconsistency exemplified, right there it is. Kenneth Gentry cannot find a text, a single text. Now, let me point something out. In his comments on Matthew chapter 25, 14 and following, in the parable of the man who went into a far country and gave talents to his servants and said, take care of this until I come again, and he was gone a long time. Kenneth Gentry says, that proves that it's 2,000 years so far. Now, folks, that's absolutely a non sequitur. That is, that's an illogical argument that does not follow. Just because it says a long time in the text does not demand an expanse of 2,000 years. So there's Kenneth Gentry's justification for a view of a coming of the Lord that is opposite of those texts that declare, pardon me, that the coming of the Lord was at hand. So Kenneth Gentry believes that there is a not at hand coming of the Lord in the New Testament, and then there is an at hand coming of the Lord in the New Testament, and the at hand coming of the Lord in the New Testament was AD 70. Well, again, Kenneth Gentry has no proof whatsoever that the long time of Matthew 25:14 and following has to be 2,000 years. Matter of fact, I think I can prove definitively that that long time was simply in regard to the generation in which he was living. I believe that can be proven easily, definitively, and irrefutably. But Kenneth Gentry acknowledges anyone familiar with his writings, and I believe it was last week, perhaps the week before, that William and I were pointing out, we hear from people all of the time who tell us that they've read Kenneth Gentry's books, they became a partial preterist, but after continuing to study and applying the hermeneutical principles that Kenneth Gentry taught them, they came to realize that Kenneth Gentry is inconsistent in being a futurist and inconsistent to be a partial preterist because his own hermeneutical principles lead directly to the true preterist view. And by the way, I received an email like this, exactly like this, at the end of last week. Another gentleman who told me that he had read Kenneth Gentry. Kenneth Gentry's hermeneutic is what led him directly to becoming a full preterist. He fought it, didn't like it, didn't want to become a true preterist, but he couldn't fight the logic, couldn't fight the hermeneutic. So, thank you once again to Kenneth Gentry for teaching people the proper logic of the true preterist view, the proper hermeneutic that leads full preterist view, because the more he teaches, the more he writes, the more commentaries he gives us, the more true preterists there are. And that's just simply a fact of life. I'll just share this quick anecdote. After my debate with Joel McDermott, I was contacted by a man, certainly not going to mention a name, but who said he attended the debate as a postmillennialist, although he had been studying Covenant Eschatology. And he contacted me a couple of months after the debate. And he said, I have to tell you that immediately during the debate, I felt like Joel McDermott had, quote, held his own, unquote, although he was not as convincing as I had hoped he would be. Nonetheless, I felt like the partial preterist view had been somewhat defended. But he said, after the debate, the more I pondered it, the more I went over my notes, the more I realized that Joel McDermott had utterly failed to defend the postmillennial view. And he said, I'm simply contacting you to let you know that I am now a full preterist. Now, here's a man who saw the logic presented by Joel McDermott, who is now the president of American Vision in Powder Springs, Georgia. Joel McDermott, who was tutored by Sam Frost, a former preterist. So you would have thought that between the two of them, they could have come up with a convincing refutation of covenant eschatology, but they pretty obviously couldn't.
Let me break in here for just a second.
Go ahead.
Is there any anything going on regarding another possible debate with another opponent anytime soon?
Well,
or is that to be kept under wraps? I don't want to say anything about it.
No, that's perfectly fine. It was on a website, or excuse me, it was on Facebook, in which, pardon me, Sam Frost had gotten on there repeatedly stating that he could put me under the table in no time, that Sam Frost could defeat Don Preston in a debate, and that Don Preston knows that he could not defeat Sam Frost in a debate. That's why Don Preston refuses to debate Sam Frost now. And folks, it has nothing to do with it. Anyone familiar at all with the fact that Sam Frost issued a public challenge to me, I accepted when we got to the point of the finalization of the rules and the protocol and the logistics. Sam Frost backed out in a very dishonorable manner, telling me he owed me no explanation whatsoever. Well, we now know part of the personal issues that were involved in that, but that's all besides the point. But I responded to Sam Frost's boast, and I said, no, I will not meet you in formal public debate, but I would meet him in a radio debate. Chris Aronson, who is the host of Iron Sharpens Steel, or Iron Sharpens Iron, or something like that, who is certainly anti-preterist all the way, had said that he would like to have a debate, but he could only have one person in his studio at a time. I guess I misunderstood Chris Aronson to say that he didn't have the technology to have an internet debate. Well, he informs me that I misunderstood him, so I'll accept his word on that. Be that as it may, just recently on a Facebook page, I went back. Sam Frost was boasting once again that I would not debate him, that I had even made the comment that I wouldn't even debate him on the radio. I made no such statement. I said that I would do that on the radio, but that Chris said that he was not set up to do it. That's when Chris told me that he could only have one person in the studio, not two. Well, I never mentioned about coming to the studio in the first place. So, Sam Frost and I have a, quote, agreement, unquote, to have a radio debate on the Chris Aronson show. Now, it's been 2 or 3 weeks since I heard from Sam Frost. I haven't heard from Chris Aronson at all about any further plans, any further arrangements for that debate to take place. It was my understanding that Sam and Chris were going to get the arrangements made, the technology set up. They would let me know about that. Now, again, maybe I misunderstood, okay?
No. Let me break in here. I have a little information on that. Sam has contacted me and asked me if I would set up the technical arrangements for the debate. And I told him that I'm capable of doing that and would be more than willing to accommodate. So he just actually contacted me for the second time today to sort of confirm that, and I just asked him to get me all the details so I can start putting that together.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm glad to hear that. In that case, I will contact Sam Frost, and he and I will begin to negotiate the propositions. We will negotiate all the logistical details that have to be worked out for something like this, just like Dr. Michael Brown and I negotiated certain things. So if Sam Frost has contacted you, that's good to know, and so perhaps we can proceed with that. We will see what happens there, and we will see if Sam Frost can put me under the table in no time at all. So,
well, it would have been a good example if he had been able to coach Joel McDermott to do that, and at least we would have had a little bit of confidence in that claim. But based on what you just shared about Joel McDermott, that might not be forthcoming. So I'm sure it's going to be a good exchange between the two.
Well, unless Sam Frost can come up with something better than Joel McDermott, and obviously he can't because he helped tutor Joel McDermott. So, again, unless he can come up with something better than what he shared with Joel McDermott, no, he can't put Preston, i.e., the true preterist view, under the table in short order. And you and I have both read his little book, Why I Left Full Preterism, and you and I have discussed that on numerous occasions. If that is the best that Sam Frost has, and it obviously is, then no, he cannot refute the true preterist view. The book is full, absolutely chock full, of presuppositional, false presuppositional argumentation. It is full of humongous logical failures that in any class on logic, the instructor would fall out of his chair at how bad these logical leaps really are. So I guess it remains to be seen if Sam Frost has come up with something new, something better, more convincing for his reasons for abandoning covenant eschatology, the truth of covenant eschatology. But where I sit right now, I'm not impressed with his book. I'm not impressed with the efforts that he gave in tutoring Joel McDermott. I have read numerous articles that Sam initially wrote upon abandoning covenant eschatology, and there was not a single argument that made me even go, that's interesting. Now, I read some things from him that made me go, do what? Surely he's not making that argument. But he did. But again, we'll see how things go. We will see how things go. Okay, back to Kenneth Gentry. It's so fascinating here. I made mention a while ago that Kenneth Gentry has said that he would not respond to or debate the true preterist view because it's not historic. It is not creedal, etc., etc. Well, Kenneth Gentry says that, let me see if I can find that. Let me see if I can find that one particular statement, because I just found it so fascinating of how he was so redundant in his comment. Let me see here. Oh, here we are. Here is what Kenneth Gentry says. By departing from universal, historic, formal, corporate, public, systematic belief of the Christian faith in these areas, and that's concerning second coming, judgment, resurrection, hyper-preterism has constructed a new, aberrant theology. Hyper-preterists have radically reworked the Christian doctrinal system and overthrown the faith once for all delivered to the saints. You know, William, I just can't help but remember what was said by Johann Eck and Prince Charles when Martin Luther was on trial. It was Prince Charles who stood up and said, if this one man, Martin Luther, is right, then church history, then the entire history of the church of 1,000 years and longer, and all of the creeds and all of the councils are in error if this one man be right. And of course, John Calvin, of whom Kenneth Gentry is a student, has often been called the stepson of Martin Luther. So the same charge could therefore be made against John Calvin of introducing new, innovative, unknown, non-historic Why? The church, if this man John Calvin is right, then all of the creeds are wrong. I know that most, if not all, Calvinists would appeal to Augustine and say, no, he held this view. Well, I don't know that you could, certainly don't know, and I would even deny that you could find 5-point Calvinism in Augustine. I would fully admit that I am not an expert on Augustine, but in what I have read, he was not a 5-point Calvinist. Now, all of that aside, I want to point something out. Here is Kenneth Gentry talking about the universal, historic, formal, corporate, public, systematic belief of the Christian faith through the centuries. And see, we're supposed to bow down before all of those adjectives. We're supposed to say, well, wow, if the Christian church, if the universal, historic, formal, corporate, public, systematic belief of the church has been X, then I do not dare even contemplate Y. And I got to tell you, William, a couple of weeks ago, the First Methodist Church here in Ardmore was going to have a special Sunday night class. I think it was Sunday night class on the rapture and whether or not it's biblical. I saw it announced on Facebook, so I decided to go. And I met the minister there, and it seemed like a very cordial gentleman. And he gave a presentation. I was sitting there hoping to hear some biblical exegesis, but, pardon me, to be honest about it, I was very interested to know what the Methodist view of the rapture is, because for many, many years now, the Methodist Church, by and large, has not even been doctrinally oriented. I've known people in the past who have told me that the Methodist Church of their youth was not the Methodist Church of modern day. So, all that aside, I was interested in knowing, what does the Methodist Church believe about the rapture? What does this local church believe about that? So I go and sit in the audience. Turned out I knew several people from that church. But anyway, he gets started, and all he does is he put 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 13 to 8 up there, 13 to 18, and says, this is the text that dispensationalists use to prove the rapture doctrine. Okay, that's true. Not one single word of exegesis. Not a word. He said, now, we as Methodists reject that view. Why do we reject that view? Because it's not historic. And it's not creedal. And I sit there and thought, and that's before Kenneth Gentry ever posted this article, but I literally sat there and thought, shades of Kenneth Gentry, because of his constant appeal to the creeds and his constant appeal to church history. And this Methodist minister sat there and for 40 minutes talked about the importance of church history. And he said, folks, if somebody jumps up today, and I thought, you know what, this guy is going to talk about the preterist view and how new it is. But since he was focused on the rapture view and Miss McDonald of 1830, etc., he never mentioned the full preterist view. But he said the preterist view didn't come along until 1830. He said, now, there are some who claim it appeared before then, but as a systemized view, it didn't appear until 1830, and he talked about Darby and Schofield and blah, blah, blah. And he said, that's the way I know this is a false doctrine. and he put up two posts, two sticks on stands, and had a wire run between them, and he had some arrows. And he said, now we can find Doctrine X here, Doctrine X there, Doctrine X there, and there. And he had this whole string of arrows. And he said, now look, if you can't point back through history at some point of time in history in which what you're teaching is found, and it's not there, then your doctrine is false. I just sat there and I just thought, whatever happened to the reality of the great apostasy that Jesus predicted would and that did come in the first century? Did that have no impact on the presence of the truth in ensuing centuries? I mean, this is an area that is improperly and insufficiently explored. And yet here's a man up there who never once mentioned the great apostasy and its potential impact on the presence of the truth or the lack of presence. And, you know, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, as has been noted many, many times. Just because we do not have explicit testimony of a certain given reality or fact doesn't mean that reality is not there somewhere. Maybe it just simply hasn't been found yet. And so I found his argument on creedalism and church history less than convincing. But watch this. Folks, you really, really have to catch the power of this. In his book on the Beast of Revelation, Kenneth Gentry wrote that he acknowledges that the position that he is writing in that book is not the historic position of the church. He agrees that it is not the majority view. He agrees it's not the creedal view. But you know what he tells us? He says, to paraphrase very roughly, that he begs the indulgence of the readers because he said, I am convinced that the evidence will become so convincing, overwhelming, that it will be like the flood of a river. So here is Kenneth Gentry acknowledging that his position on Revelation, it's not creedal. It is not, let me see here, it's not the universal, historic, formal, corporate, public, systematic belief of the Christian belief through the centuries. But Kenneth Gentry says, hey, that doesn't matter because it's what I believe to be what the Bible says. Interesting. I took note of something a while ago that Kenneth Gentry, in his book, Navigating the Book of Revelation, says, in spite of appearances, Revelation 21 and 22 do not speak of the consummate new heaven and new earth. That is, the new creation to arrive at the supposed end of time, per his futurist eschatology. No pejorative meaning attached to the word futurist. And, by the way, Kenneth Gentry is also on record, as I document in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, the Wedding of the King of Kings. Kenneth Gentry is on record as saying that in AD 70, the old covenant bride of Judah and Jerusalem was divorced. And by the way, that theme is the focus of this massive 2-volume commentary that he has been writing over the last several years. He believes, he sees and will be setting forth the case that Revelation is about the divorcement of Old Covenant Judah and Jerusalem in AD 70. And he says, in AD 70, the new covenant bride fully supplanted the old covenant bride. Okay, let me see here. Kenneth Gentry's view on Jerusalem being Babylon, Kenneth Gentry's view that Revelation is about the divorcement of Old Covenant Judah, Jerusalem, the New Covenant bride fully supplanting the Old Covenant bride in AD 70, folks, listen to me, is absolutely not the universal, historic, formal, corporate, public, systematic belief of the Christian faith in these areas, unquote. But hey, you know what? It's the hyper-preterists who are false teachers, because we take a view of eschatology that is not the universal, historic, formal, corporate, public, systematic belief of the Christian faith in these areas. So Kenneth Gentry is just fine to take these views of Revelation. And folks, how much more eschatological can you get than the new heaven and new earth? I mean, folks, there is nothing more eschatological than that. And yet here's Kenneth Gentry taking a view that is absolutely in total violation of the creeds, total violation of church history. But that's okay for him to do that. It's just not okay for preterists to be consistent in their application of those issues. It's not okay for the true preterist to take Kenneth Gentry's hermeneutic and say, Brother Gentry, you're just wrong. Here's your hermeneutic. When I apply that consistently, I arrive at AD 70 on the coming of the Lord, judgment, and resurrection. Oh, and by the way, folks, listen to me. Listen very, very carefully to me. Kenneth Gentry believes the Lord came in AD 70. Kenneth Gentry believes judgment occurred in AD 70. Kenneth Gentry believes resurrection occurred in AD 70. And you go, wait a minute. What did you say, Don Preston? That's exactly right. I didn't stutter, and I didn't misrepresent. Folks, you have to understand, Kenneth Gentry in his book, The Glory of the Great Commission, or The Greatness of the Great Commission, I may have that title a little bit wrong, but I don't have the content wrong. In that book, Kenneth Gentry took the position that Daniel chapter 12 foretold the final resurrection at the end of human history. In his 2009 volume of He Shall Have Dominion, Kenneth Gentry now takes the position, and by the way, he didn't tell anybody let me see, what was the terminology that he used of how hyper-preterists have radically reworked the Christian doctrinal system? Well, let's see. What did Kenneth Gentry do with the historic, formal, corporate, public, systematic Christian doctrinal system in regard to Babylon? He radically reworked it. What did Kenneth Gentry do with the doctrine of the new heaven and new earth of Revelation? He radically reworked it. That's radically reworking the biblical narrative in regard to eschatology. No way around that. So, anyway, in the 2009 version of He Shall Have Dominion, I believe that's the correct book, he came to the position, guess what? He came to a view of Daniel chapter 12 that preterists have been teaching and advocating. Now, look, I am convinced, folks, I don't want to be unfair, don't want to be unkind, and I certainly don't want to misrepresent Dr. Gentry. But Kenneth Gentry, until the true preterists began being so vocal, so adamantly and powerfully and effectively pointing to Daniel chapter 12 as the fulfillment of the resurrection promise of the Old Covenant in AD 70, Kenneth Gentry never changed his views until the full preterist emphasis on Daniel chapter 12. And the teaching that Daniel chapter 12 verse 7 would be fulfilled, that is the resurrection of verse 2, would be fulfilled when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. Well, lo and behold, Kenneth Gentry has done an amazing conversion and now takes the position that, guess what? Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 does in fact speak of the corporate resurrection of Israel out of covenant death being transformed into the spiritual body of Christ in AD 70. So Kenneth Gentry, guess what he did? Kenneth Gentry radically reworked he radically reworked the universal, historic, formal, corporate, public, systematic belief of the church in regard to Daniel chapter 12. And he didn't even tell people, you know, folks, I once believed this about Daniel chapter 12. I've changed my views. Here's what I now believe. So Kenneth Gentry has come closer and closer and closer to the view of covenant eschatology, radically reworking some of the major biblical texts on eschatology, now denying the historic, systematic, formal, public view of the church and applying them to AD 70. He takes 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 to AD 70, folks. That is not the creedal view of the church. And by the way, in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, the Wedding of the King of Kings, I document how modern postmillennialists so radically reject the historic, the creedal view of the church, historic Christian church, in regard to an entire laundry list of eschatological tenets, all the while claiming to be faithful to the creeds. Folks, they're not faithful to the creeds. The only way in the world that the modern postmillennial dominionist paradigm can claim to be faithful to the creeds is to simply say, the creeds say Jesus is coming, we say Jesus is coming. In that sense, okay, they're creedal. And yet they have abandoned the very arguments made in the creeds based upon these major eschatological texts. Okay, by the way, there are some postmillennialists that even accept that 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 was fulfilled in AD 70. Joel McDermott said that 1 Corinthians 15 had, quote, a fulfillment, unquote, in AD 70. When I challenged him to produce that from history, he didn't even try. And by the way, I doubt very seriously that Kenneth Gentry would agree with that view. So it's just, I tell you, it's absolutely amazing. But you know what, folks? Look, we're out of time for this evening. Let me reiterate, if you would like to see a debate between Kenneth Gentry and Don K. Preston at the 2017 Preterist Pilgrim Weekend, please go to Kenneth Gentry's website, his blog, postmillennialismtoday.com, and urge Dr. Gentry to accept my challenge. I sent an email to him today urging him to debate me. Let's urge Dr. Gentry to engage in a formal public debate. And let's see if his view of postmillennialism, his creedal, historic view, will stand up to a genuine examination in light of sola scriptura. And with that, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening's Two Guys and a Bible, right here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. I will say good night and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys and a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.